Many more people may be trickling in over time. You'll see that this meeting is being recorded. So if you could please click the continue button as that pops up, that would be great. Welcome everyone to the Daisy Center webinar called Building Effective Virtual Teams for Stakeholder Engagement. My name is Jennifer Dale, and I'm here with my colleague, Andrea Schombacher from the Daisy Center. And we also work with Johns Hopkins University and the School of Education at the Center for Technology and Education, both as program administrators. And over the past few years, Andrea and I collaborated with and engaged virtually, both nationally and internationally, with teams around data analysis, action planning, and those types of things. So we hope to share some of the strategies and tips and tricks with what we've learned over that time with you today. We also are the co-developers and lead trainers for an approach called Daisy Dynamic Impact, which will see some of the content woven throughout the day today. We're also here along with our colleague from the Daisy Center, Michelle Lewis, who is with the New Hampshire Parent Information Center as the executive director and also a consultant with the Daisy Center. Michelle is experienced in working at the state and local level, ensuring that requirements and intent of IDEA are met and that the program, school district, and family positions are heard. And her passion is stakeholder engagement, especially family engagement. So we're excited to have Michelle with us today also as we talk about building effective virtual stakeholder teams. Before we dive into the content, we wanted to review some logistics. Before we get started, we would love to take your questions in the chat throughout the presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will spend a good amount of time for questions and answers, and we'll be monitoring the chat along the way. Also, please mute yourself if you're not speaking. And if you're just joining us, please know that the session is being recorded and the recording will be sent out after the webinar today. So we're going to dive in by looking at our learning objectives, and the objectives for this webinar today are by the end of the webinar, the participants will be able to identify the new requirements related to stakeholder engagement in IDEA Part C and Part B 619. Also, you'll identify different levels of stakeholder engagement. We're going to describe a protocol for effective stakeholder engagement that you can use. And then also we're going to align virtual strategies to promote various levels of engagement for stakeholders. So as a warm-up, we want you to be thinking about who do you define as your stakeholder. So we want to get a sense from out there in the field about the way you define this. This is a tool called Slido that we're going to practice using today in our warm-up because we're going to use it 2 other times throughout the webinar today. This is also a tool that you can use to engage your stakeholders virtually. So we're going to use this for engagement in our webinar today, and it's also another free tool that you can use with your stakeholders in your virtual meetings. So what you'll do is if you could take out your phone or an iPad, and you're going to open up the camera button, just like you're trying to take a picture of your screen. And when you aim your camera at the QR code, there will be a website that pops up at the top of your screen. And if you click on that link, it will take you to a website. If you don't have your phone or your iPad handy or any kind of tablet handy, you can also simply go to slido.com and you can type in that number on the screen, hashtag 484991. And so what we'd like you to do is to test this tool out for virtual stakeholder engagement by starting by defining who are your stakeholders that you're thinking about. When we're talking about we're building stakeholder engagement teams, who are those people in your opinion? Great, so I can see some of you are getting in there. And we did want to mention this is a free tool that integrates right into PowerPoint. And we have another webinar, a previous webinar, webinar 8. If you weren't here to check that out, we do have a webinar with more ideas for using Slido for virtual engagement. Okay, great. And this also tracks participant responses. So we can see 11 people have responded, 12 people. So this is another way that you can keep track of virtual engagement and interactions with your stakeholders by looking at the total number of participants and comparing that to how many are engaging in your activities. So wow, thank you so much for all of you that are getting into Slido and adding your ideas. So we see just a few of these answers. We see parents and families. We see local lead agency directors, teachers, community, state agencies, interagency partners, families and children, anyone impacted by the policies and statutes that we are charged to implement, and anyone who has a vested interest in our program. Wow, that's a great way to get started. And that's what we're going to be talking about next. Michelle Lewis is going to talk a little bit more about stakeholder engagement and working with all of these diverse stakeholders, this list that we see on the screen right now. So thank you so much for sharing and participating in our little warm-up activity.
Thank you all for joining us today. Even though I want to be clear from the beginning that this is not a training on the OSEP stakeholder requirements, but we did think that it would be helpful to start with going over to frame the training related to what are the new stakeholder requirements. And so we actually pulled out the exact language, and we'll highlight a few things because it's going to inform what we share with you moving forward. So, and all this information can be found in the SPP APR Universal Technical Assistance. And we'll put the link in the chat. So if you're looking for what this is about and want to read more about it, we have the citation for you to check that out. So OSEP is really asking you and to document the number of parent members and a description of how these parent members are engaged in target setting, analyzing data, developing improvement strategies, and evaluating progress. They're also asking for a description of the activities that were conducted to increase the capacity of diverse groups of parents to support these things in order to improve outcomes, or designed to improve outcomes for infants, toddlers, and children with disabilities and their families. The next piece is they're also looking at what are the mechanisms, timelines for soliciting input related to target setting and analyzing data. So what was your process? And then the fourth piece is looking at those mechanisms and timelines for making these results related to target setting, data analysis, and development of improvement strategies and evaluation available to the public. So one of the pieces that they are looking at is really taking a look at those diverse stakeholder groups. And we're going to talk more about that throughout today. So when we think about representativeness, OSEP has shared with us, or has shared with all of you as well, as part of their presentation to you during a technical assistance call on April 8th of 2001, and we have that link later. But one of the things they talk about is how, and states are asking, how do you define representatives? How do we know if our stakeholder engagement and who we're engaging is representative of our population that we serve? And one of the things OSEP says in that webinar is that it's really up to states to determine their diverse stakeholder groups and whether or not it's representative of their population. And they do need to have a description of how they determined these diverse groups of stakeholders and whether it was representative or not. And the other thing they would point you to is both your C4 data and your B8 data in helping you determine representativeness. So you can use your data that you already have because of the required demographic category to really take a look at, are you reaching the full broad range of stakeholders that you have from all different types of backgrounds and race and ethnicity. They're really looking for some intentionality in terms of who, in terms of representativeness. So this is just, again, this representativeness slide, actually pieces of it come straight from that universal technical assistance document as well that we've shared in the chat. So there, it really going through an intentional process to look at who's involved from a stakeholder perspective. So in summary, in terms of stakeholder engagement, and again, this comes from the OSEP presentation, is that they're really asking states to expand stakeholder groups and increase family representation. You can use, there's a piece around, and we'll talk more about this, but your parent centers, your community partners that you are working with on an ongoing basis to help you with these things. They're also asking you, again, we just discussed this, but aligning stakeholder demographics to reflect those demographics of families and communities throughout your entire state. And they're also looking for continuous active engagement with multiple methods and timeframes to get stakeholder engagement and to keep stakeholder engagement throughout the life of the State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report. So this quote comes from the IDA Data Center, Nancy O'Hara's blog, in terms of what will stakeholder engagement look like with the new SPP APR. And the piece we really want to highlight here is states should not wait for more clarification, but should start planning their stakeholder engagement strategies now. And I would bet, just because I know that my both Part B and Part C offices in the state that I'm from are already working on this. So I would guess that you have all started stakeholder engagement aspects related to target setting and improvement strategies and all of those things. And I think that what we're going to do today is give you some additional ideas and strategies to really look at stakeholder engagement, to really get the depth and breadth that it appears OSEP through their universal TA is asking you to do. And so we, throughout this webinar, will kind of outline some different tricks, we'll provide some protocols, and we'll provide some strategies related to the different ways we can get input and stakeholder engagement. So Jennifer said in the introduction that one of my passions is stakeholder engagement, and it absolutely is. And one of the things I think we all know, but I think it's really worth putting forward, is that what states are being asked to do may require a different way of doing business. And it may require a different way of doing business for everybody, including families, including locals, including communities, and including state personnel. It's an intentional and proactive process. So we know that stakeholder engagement is a process. We know that it may require a lot of times, and this is a really strong thing, we have stakeholder meetings. And stakeholder meetings are very important. But what we just described and what OSEP is outlining is something that is more than just one meeting or even two meetings. It is a relationship. So it is the beginning of a relationship, and that relationship is going to take some time to develop. So it's that pieces that we've talked about in other webinars that Daisy has presented about in terms of those technical aspects. So what are you required to do? A lot of this is going to take some of those adaptive leadership skills that you all have to develop those relationships and be really intentional and proactive, and really understand that it's going to take some time, which will need to be balanced with the technical aspects of what we outlined as some of the OSEP requirements. So it's a balancing act. And because we know continuous engagement over the course of the entire State Performance Plan Annual Performance Report is going to require trust building, it's going to require time, and it's not a one-shot deal. So just think about that as we go through. We know that you are in the midst of your planning. And so what it looks like now may look very different a year from now. But again, starting to really think about how you're approaching this at this point in time will help you with each passing year. When we look at stakeholder engagement, one of the things I always immediately look to is leading by convening, a blueprint for authentic engagement. And Andrea is going to put that in the chat as well. So in case you're not familiar with it, leading by convening, this is levels of engagement, and it's a framework of the depths of engagement. And what we're going to talk about today really is about developing that infrastructure and recognizing that all levels of engagement are critical. So stakeholders don't all want to be engaged in the same way. Everybody's really busy. We have different time, all of these types of things that are going on. But what we want to make sure is that we use these levels of engagement and that we use all of the levels so that we are reaching everybody, so that we are engaging everybody. And the piece I want to highlight here, and we're going to talk more about in the next coming slides, is this transforming level. This is that different way of doing business. And we're going to dive into this a little bit, but it is really looking at deep cross-stakeholder engagement and leadership, sharing leadership, and building consensus. And from there, you want to design activities related to collaborating. So you're engaging a more representative group of stakeholders who care about the issue and trying to work together around the issue to make change. So that is a very important aspect of designing your activities. Then you have networking, asking a select group what they think about an issue, listening to what they have to say. So that back and forth. So not only are you providing information, you're getting information back from your stakeholders around their response to what you're putting forth. And informing, I think sometimes we think about when I'm working with states or even in my local communities, we think about informing as well. It's important, but we're not getting stakeholder information back. And I would say, well, that's true. Informing is really important. You really need to look at how are you informing people about the issue, because it makes the other strategies really difficult if people don't have that baseline information. So wherever you're looking at your levels of engagement, yes, we certainly want shared leadership at that transforming level, but you also want these other levels as well, in terms of collaborating, networking, and informing, which allows you to engage everybody. So engaging a broad range of stakeholders, and this also comes out of leading by convening. And I think it's helpful to look at when you're looking at how are you going to approach this? So one way is looking at the levels of engagement, and now we're going to, or the depths of the interaction. Now we're going to look at it through the lens of these concentric circles. And so it looks at ways that stakeholder roles can be defined. And we're also going to take and align these to those depths of interaction. So I think it's really important for you to look at, again, all of these are really key pieces. You have your core team, your key participants and advisors, your extended participants, those feedback loops, and then also your dissemination. The core team are leaders from diverse groups who are committed to the success of the work and who are doing things in that partnership way, that transforming level. And they're engaged in the development of a stakeholder engagement action plan. We're going to talk more about this, but this transforming level and this core level is going to have you think about a different way of doing business, because you're going to look at a team of people that are within your state agencies and also outside of your state agencies. So when some of you were putting into the Slido all of these people who care about the issue, you have to really think, who are my members of the core team? How can we all work together to reach all of the stakeholders in these other networks? So again, this is that transforming level. You have your key participants and advisors. Though these folks have a responsibility for and an interest in the issue, and they are engaged at the collaborating level. So that could look at a lot of different ways. So you might go out into that community and do some focus groups, do some really in-depth work. You might do a task force. You could do all kinds of things related to go out into that key advising, key participant level. The extended participants and feedback networks are individuals who are reached through the organizations and networks that are key participants and advisors, and I would say even members of the core team. So they are really engaged at that networking level. So again, through these relationships, you are reaching other people that you maybe haven't actually reached before, but it's through these critical relationships that you were able to broaden your array of stakeholders. And then again, the dissemination networks include participants from all the groups within the circles and all other groups related to the issue. And so that's those informing levels. So that's like your universal, like how are you informing people? How are you creating this framework for making sure people understand not only what you're doing, but some of the information that you're wanting to move things forward with. So I promised that we would talk a little bit about engaging core teams at the transforming level, and here we are. In terms of identifying core team, we're going to do a whole section on how we think about engaging and identifying a core team. But again, these are leaders from diverse groups. It really, at this core team, you're looking at sharing leadership. And that sometimes is very different concept. So there's going to be some group norms and protocols and help with team member engagement that needs to occur at the transforming level. And we're going to take you through a protocol that can help with some of that, because it's this transforming level that can really help with developing that stakeholder engagement plan. And then monitoring progress. And again, this is also using that plan, do, study, act cycle. So what you put in place now, you may try something and it doesn't work, and you go back and you would evaluate it and monitor your progress. That's okay. We know that stakeholder engagement is not, one, it's not a linear process, and two, that it can be messy. And the other thing I would want to say is it also can be risky. I think that there's some of this, especially at the transforming level, but I would argue in all of the levels, that it can feel like a risk. You're putting some information forward. You maybe not have worked with some people before. And so it's always a balancing act. And just know that it's not necessarily possibly a risk for you at the state level. It's also risky for the families and other diverse participants who are on your team, because they may have never worked at this level, meaning in this way, not a level, but in this way before. So we're going to dive into kind of what we can do at the core level and how we select people. Or groups, I should say, stakeholder groups at the core level, and what we can do to help prepare people for these types of conversations in this next section.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Now we want to hear from you again. We want to know when you are setting your OSEP, SPP, or APR targets, from which stakeholder groups or representatives would you invite leaders to form that core team that we just discussed? So if you would please take those phones out or go to slido.com and send your answers our way so that we can see what you're thinking. Okay, great. So when you're thinking about that core team and building that team to do that transformational work, we see people from an inclusion task force potentially, people from the ICC, maybe some parents, parent advocates, SICC. Excellent. And you'll see, take notice with this Slido tool, everything, the answers are coming up in a different format. So this is different. This is a scrolling text. So I'm going to scroll down here so you guys can see everyone's answers. Oops, let's go back. Okay. Awesome. Local education agencies. I see lots of parents, existing groups, work groups. Excellent. So when you're thinking about bringing people together for that core team, these are definitely thoughts that you would have and traditionally where you would go to look for those team members. So I'm going to pass it back over to Michelle to take us into a deeper dive of who you could also consider to serve on your core team. So thank you for participating.
Thanks, Andrea. So as we think about identifying a core team, we really need to look at what are the elements for you to possibly consider to expand the variety of your team. So we know that some state staff, it's a very core, small group of people. So think of the core team as a way to actually expand the work that you do. So it may be some out of the box thinking, but it's kind of working smarter, not harder, to use that example. So think about who you typically have on your team. And those are important folks to have on your team. So you want to look across your state agency, right? So you want that vertical and possibly your horizontal alignment, but also look at what areas of the state you may want to represent. I was working with a state just recently who was saying that most of their family stakeholder engagement really comes from the two most populous cities. And so they were struggling to reach rural populations. And so they were connecting with one of their parent centers in that region who serves primarily rural families to kind of get that geographic representation. The other piece is taking a look at that race ethnicity. And so I know that I'm working with another state agency who's trying to figure out how are we going to reach the refugee population in our community. And one of the things that as we're working within this group is that we are identifying two main refugee organizations who have the relationships with the families within those refugee communities to be on our core team so that we can use that type of feedback loop to use those relationships to really get at where the voice of the families in those regions. And so we really need to take a look at who's on our team. And this also gets back to the different programs that you serve. You can look at stakeholder disability, you can look at stakeholder socioeconomic. And so certainly you want to take a look at, you can't have this huge team, but you want to look at, this is where you can take a look at your data in terms of representativeness or who's served where, again, looking at that geographic representation and see if you can get a core team that is representative of the population that you serve and use those key community agencies and stakeholders in order to plan those activities to reach the differing populations. Again, this takes time. It is not a check the box. It's more than just meetings and those types of things. We recognize that we are asking something that is potentially difficult to do, but it's allowing you to really use your data and use who you know you are serving and to develop relationships so you are able to engage everybody. And again, your parent centers and your other state community organizations are really helpful in helping you reach communities that are more difficult for you to reach at the state agency level. We've also put some questions in here for you all to think about in terms of how you think about assembling your table, particularly with an equity lens. And so you really want to look at, and you can ask yourself at that core team level, some of these questions. You know, who will be representing the interests of the individual community members whose data are being used? You know, who's influential in your area, community, organization? Are there any barriers? And how are you going to address those barriers? So you want to look at who has some shared concerns, who should be at the table to ensure some of that real progress. And sometimes look for unlikely allies. I know that when I'm doing my work, I always say to my staff, and they actually can't stand it, is I'm always like, the benefits in the struggle, right? But if we surround ourselves by everybody who views things the same way, we may not get to a better answer or a better strategy. So just take a look at some of these questions to help you think about who's at your table. And this can be used not only at the core team, but when you're planning focus groups, when you're planning task forces, and any other type of where you're gaining stakeholder engagement. So when you're bringing families and family organization stakeholders and they're coming to the decision-making table, what's the benefit? And I think we know many of the benefits, but I want to highlight a couple, and I want to briefly talk about them. Families and family organizations have unique life stories that give them motivation. So they have a different type of motivation. We all have motivation. We all want to improve our system. But families have that very personal and deep knowledge. They want to be a part of the thinking and system improvement. So the other piece, though, they need to realize as family members, this is beyond their own child, right? So we're asking them to really take a broader look at the system. Families come with varied life experiences, so they're going to have different levels of access to information and support, which ultimately means at the state agency level, and when you're going to have to look at what types of supports or training or orientation would families need to be able to be part of the core team or even be part of kind of these extended networks for you to be able to orient them and support them in understanding so that you can get feedback from them. They also have different experiences using data in both their personal and professional lives. So I was just in a stakeholder group this morning with a family member who has 3 children with disabilities, and she actually is an evaluator. So her level of access and experience with using data is well above mine. So the questions she asked were very deep. We also had family members who had no experience with the data, so we had to spend more time kind of orienting. And so that's just important for us to keep in mind. We also need to look at this intersectional identities that inform the understanding of the data. So thinking about, you know, and the example in here is a mother who they may identify as being a mother, as female, and as Asian American. And so these overlapping identities and how they experience these different systems that are out there. And then everybody has different feelings about today's data-rich culture. And I think we need to understand that stakeholders, in particular families and families organizations, come to the decision-making table with various levels. So to effectively serve as program stakeholders, families and family organization representatives, when you're thinking about planning your activities, some of the things that you would need to think about is helping families understand why data is important, understand what the data is being collected and how the data is being used. An example of that is we were looking even just this morning on a stakeholder meeting, and the state was presenting kind of what they believed a target for this indicator would be. And families weren't understanding, they understood to some extent the measurement, but they weren't understanding kind of how it was being collected and how did the survey that was coming in basically get analyzed and a number to come out. So there was a big discussion about, could you compare state to state? Why does some state have 80% and we're at 30%? What does that mean? So we actually had to spend a lot of time just orienting to kind of what the data is, how it gets translated into a measurement, and then how do you use this measurement to set targets? And that got tricky this morning because I'm not sure everybody was ready for that type of discussion. And we also need to think about who is involved in data conversations and their role in decision making. And then understand how they are and can be involved with data use. The other piece I want to highlight in this slide in particular is that when you're at any of these quote levels or depths of interaction, it's essential to create a safe environment and provide support for families to feel comfortable about asking questions about data. And I have been in many meetings where I walk out of a meeting and ask a family how it went, and they say, I have no idea what the discussion had, like what this was about. And so when we think about having family members and parent organizations, and I would say even local team members on these core teams, is to not make assumptions that we all know about what's happening. Because if we go with the baseline knowledge that we all need an orientation and we set up some ground rules and we set up with some team operations, and again, this would be core team or any of the other teams, we create an environment where everybody is comfortable asking questions about data. And sometimes, and I actually would recommend, you be really explicit about that. Be really clear that you want questions, that you are wanting not just their input, but questions about even what a graph means. And maybe sometimes even just explaining it, even if somebody says, well, does anyone have any questions about that? Does everybody understand the way this data is represented? We don't always feel comfortable, regardless of who we are, saying, I have no idea what this means. And so thinking about how you structure it so that people do feel comfortable. And we're going to talk about that in this protocol that will allow us to ensure that team members know how to engage with each other. And again, it's a different way potentially of doing business, because I think we do need to recognize there's an inherent hierarchy that just happens. It's kind of like when me as a parent goes into my team meetings at my school, or even when we were in early intervention, I remember having these team meetings, and even though I knew about my child, I had a background in this, I would default, and still do, and I run an agency, you default to, in my mind, the professionals in the room. And so we constantly need to remind ourselves, so I know I do, that people want to hear from me. And some of that is that environment that gets set up, particularly around data. And I think that that's really important. So the transforming, this partnership way that we've been talking about at that core team level, in terms of building relationships and equal partnership, sharing responsibility, having collective impact, really coming to consensus, and really planning out these different strategies and using the relationships and using this as a collective in order to be able to engage everybody. I'm going to have Jennifer Dale is going to take us through a protocol that can help implement many of these components at the transforming level.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Michelle. So you've heard a lot about the partnership approach and the different level to engage with this core team. And you may be thinking, yes, I agree with that. I believe in that also, but where do I start, or how do I do that? So we thought it would be helpful to align the work that we do around virtual engagement of teams, both nationally and internationally, like I explained, that Andrea and I have experience in. And we want to share with you today a protocol that you can use with your core stakeholder team to help guide them through the steps towards that partnership approach. So the protocol that we're going to be sharing with you today is called the United Protocol, and it was developed by Mainzer and Stein in 2013 out of Johns Hopkins University and the School of Education. And the purpose of this protocol is to guide teams through a step-by-step process to build that culture of psychological safety and high performance teamwork. And that this is based on the literature of effective teaming and really culling through that research and putting this together in 6 steps that you can follow in order to engage your core stakeholder team at that transformational level. So the United Protocol, United is an acronym, and each letter in the word United stands for a specific step of the protocol. So the first step of the protocol is you to unveil your beliefs, vision, and mission with your team. So talk about, like Michelle said, that people have different perspectives and you want different perspectives on your core stakeholder team. Before you get started into the work, open up the conversation about what do we believe about the work we're getting ready to engage in? What do we believe about data and how we should use data to inform our decisions in our stakeholder engagement plan? And what do we believe about stakeholder engagement, period? Would be another great question to open up with to talk to your core stakeholder team. And that conversation around the beliefs will help you as you develop a vision and a mission for the work of your team. Take time to talk about why are we here? What are the desired outcomes that we hope to make based on the work of the stakeholder team, which is the vision statement. And then for the mission, how are we going to get there? What strategies are we going to use? How will we engage with each other in order to reach that vision? So that's the first step of the United Protocol, is to think about, to share your beliefs and think about where your team wants to go and how your core team will get there. The second step of the United Protocol, the N, stands for Name Team Operating Standards. So this is another thing that Michelle referenced earlier, and that has to do with building that safe environment for your families and your stakeholders to engage. And this is talking about how are we going to operate together and how will we make sure that everybody's voices are heard. The I in the United Protocol stands for Identify 6 high performance teaming principles, which we'll talk about in just a minute, and really understanding we are striving to work in this efficient way because these are the characteristics of effective teamwork. So we'll walk you through those principles in just a few slides. The T in United stands for targeting team goals and roles. So what are our goals for our team as a whole? What are our goals for the way that we're going to collaborate together? And what roles will we have with this in this core team? And how will those roles rotate, which is something we're going to talk about in just a little bit. Also, you'll establish a team identity. You're not just a group that's going to have meetings. That research shows that effective teams have a team name and an identity, and that really helps to promote that esprit de corps within the group and really helps to build that engagement and momentum with the group also, with your team. And then finally, the last step of the United Protocol, after you talk about your beliefs, vision, and mission, you get your team operating standards in place, you talk about your goals and roles and your team identity, then you're going to talk about the logistics, the how often are we going to meet, and those types of logistical things that sometimes we skip over, that we're recommending that you start from the very beginning with figuring out all of those logistics. So this is a protocol that you can use, these 6 steps right here as you work with your stakeholder teams. And we're going to pull out a few strategies from within the United Protocol that you can take and use with your stakeholder teams tomorrow. So the United Protocol helps to develop what we're calling a high performance team based on the research of high performance teaming. And this can be defined here through the high performance teaming principles. So these are the characteristics of a high performance team. And you can also see the alignment with the transforming level of stakeholder engagement throughout these. So high performance teams, they have positive interdependence, which means that team members are linked with each other and one cannot succeed unless everyone succeeds. So they're not dependent on each other, they're interdependent. And when one succeeds, they all succeed. Individual accountability means that each member is accountable for for contributing his or her share the work for the team to make progress, so that everybody on the team is accountable. Performance monitoring means that teams reflect upon how well they're achieving their goals and maintaining effective working relationships. This is one of the things that we find that teams often skip over, is taking a moment to reflect on the way that you're operating. Is this the best time of day for us to meet? Is the way that we're organizing our shared documents, is this working well for us? Many times when you're working with teams and developing an effective teaming process, you're moving to the next thing because there's so much work to do. And what we would recommend is, with your core stakeholder team, thinking about taking a moment at times to reflect. Does everybody feel like their voice is being heard? How are we doing with positive interdependence? Is everybody engaging equally? And those types of conversations are important to have to build that sense of psychological safety. Also, high performance teams and teams at the transforming level of engagement have engagement and momentum, which means that team members share resources, they help and encourage each other and praise each other's efforts to achieve the desired outcome. Also, they have collaborative competence, which means that teams have interpersonal and small group skills required to promote collaboration. And we're going to show you one of those strategies you can use to promote collaboration in just a minute. And then finally, high performance teams optimize technology. So there's a principle called technology optimization, that teams use technology and data to maximize efficiency. So after we talk about the content of how do you go through these steps to engage your team at the transforming level, Andrea is going to talk about the technology piece and how do you do this in a virtual environment, which is related to one of these principles, technology optimization. So one of the key things that you've seen throughout the transforming approach and the partnership way, as well as one of the key concepts that's embedded into the United Protocol, is the importance of coming to consensus. And that as you're working with your core stakeholder team, you want to build a process to come to consensus on decisions, so that it's not always one or two people that are making the decisions and everybody else is nodding their head and going along with what the one or two people that are the most vocal in the group think. So it's important that coming to consensus promotes equal voice across the table, and that if you have diverse stakeholders, it's important to hear all of their different perspectives, and that the best ideas come out not when everybody just agrees with the first idea that's on the table. And that having that divergent thinking really promotes some of the really key ideas that can take into consideration everybody's voice at the table. It also helps make informed decisions. Like we said, sometimes it takes time to process your thoughts to get to the best answer or the best result. And many times when everyone just goes along with what the first or second person says, you don't have that time to make some of those more informed decisions. So it is important to take time for that. And it also promotes decision buy-in. So when decisions are made, you can make sure that everybody on your core team has buy-in to that decision, as opposed to when they leave the meeting and talk to Michelle afterwards about how they think that went, they say, oh, I didn't really agree with that, but I didn't really know how to speak up or how how to share, but I just went along with it, even though in the meeting, they might have said, yes, we agree with that, because they want to go along with the group. So, and we love this quote that says effective consensus falls somewhere on a continuum between perfect agreement and total discord, and that poor strategic decisions emerge at either extreme. So this is a really important concept for you to consider, a process for you coming to consensus as you're working with your core team. So we have a few ideas to share with you. And a lot of times we give teams their choice of what works best for them. So we wanted to share 3 different types of decision-making processes that you might want to use in order to help with that consensus and making decisions with consensus with your core team. So the first example of a decision-making process that you could use is super simple: thumbs up or thumbs down. So as decisions are put on the table, all you would simply do is ask everybody on your core team if they agree or disagree with the decision. And you can do this with thumbs up or thumbs down. Literally, if you're in a virtual environment, you can use the reaction button maybe in order to identify if everybody agrees or if anyone disagrees. And if someone disagrees with that decision, that is okay. That is a great opportunity for you to stop the conversation and for you to hear the people's perspective that disagree with the decision. And then what you would do is you would hear the people that disagree, let them voice their opinions with why they disagree, and then you would come back together for another thumbs up or thumbs down, and you would come to move to that consensus where everybody can get to a thumbs up, is the goal for that one. Another one that we love, that we use all the time with our families, with every day in work, is the 5-3-1 protocol. So this is similar to the thumbs up, thumbs down, but it's more of a scale of how strongly you agree with the decision. So 5-3-1, the 5 stands for I strongly agree with the decision. A 3 means I can live with the decision. I agree with the decision. I don't strongly agree, but I can support it outside of this meeting. That I agree with it enough that I can support it. And then a 1 means that you strongly disagree with the decision. And it's similar where you would put a decision on the table. Does everybody agree that this accurately reflects our vision for our team, for example? And some could say, I'm a 5 on that vision statement. I strongly agree. I'm a 3. I would like to tweak a couple words here or there, but for the purpose of this, I can live with it. I don't need to, we're not going to stop everything for this. Or someone might say, I'm a 1. I disagree that term should be used, and I feel strongly that we need a different type of word in our vision statement, as an example. And so that's another type of process that you can use to get a sense of how strongly someone agrees or disagrees. This is also great to use with your dinner decisions with your families. I'm a 5 on Mexican, or I'm a 3 on Italian. So this is something that you can use in your everyday life also. And then finally, another process you can use for larger stakeholder teams is the idea of checks or tallies. And so you might use in a virtual environment a Padlet, where you would have them use Post-it notes and technology to identify if they agree or disagree with check marks or with tallies. And if you're in a face-to-face room, you can use chart paper and markers. So think about how you could do each of these different types of strategies if you're face-to-face or virtual. A lot of times for the 5-3-1, people can just put their hands up right to the camera, or we also have them type in the chat as well. So we want you to think about these different types of strategies in those both of those different settings. So that's one part of the protocol that we hope that you can use and walk away to help build consensus in your decision making. Another key piece of the United Protocol and helping to build that psychological safety is to determine your team operating standards. So these are 6 team operating standards that we usually start with teams. where these are the basic core features of effective group norms and what is important about these team standards, which may seem simple to you. Listen actively to understand, complete activities on time, participate and contribute to team productivity, respect, offer help, and be organized and prepared is not saying these are our standards and we're going to adhere to them, but it's what do these mean to us? So when you talk about group norms and you're making your list of your standards that you want to operate with, what does that look like for me versus what might that look like for Andrea or Michelle? So for example, listening actively to understand, I might perceive that listening actively to understand means that everyone has their cameras on and their microphones are muted when I'm speaking. Andrea might think that listening actively to understand means that she doesn't have to have her camera on. She can listen, but that doesn't mean she has to have her camera on because she has a back issue and actually needs to stand up and walk around during long virtual meetings. And it's taking the time when you're talking about, we're gonna talk about the way we will operate, to talk about standards like these, but also come to consensus on, for our team, listening actively to understand means that have your camera off and that you're engaged in the meeting, you're typing in the chat and you're muting and unmuting. But if you don't need to have your camera on, or you cannot have your camera on, or you don't prefer it, then that's okay. And so that's the important piece of that concept of standards, is talking through it so that everyone can be on the same page with the way that you want to operate. Andrea, do you want to add anything on?
You just made me think about how important this is right now, Jen, because our new normal is the fact that all of us are in different places at different times. And sometimes we have to operate in ways that we didn't 2 years ago. For example, taking a meeting while in the car, things that I never would have thought I would have had to do as a parent and as you're building your core team. Talking about that ahead of time alleviates so much stress and distress from somebody that might have to be hopping in the car when your core team meeting starts. So those things right now especially are very important to consider, especially as you're trying to expand your reach and involve people who may not have been a part of your core team in the past.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for adding that on. And when you think about these team standards and back to the high performance teaming principles, it's not just about coming to consensus on these and then like leaving them in your cloud somewhere or on a chart paper. It's about reflecting on these and that concept of performance monitoring every time your core team meets. How did we do today with listening actively to understand? Are we completing our activities on time? And building in a process within your agenda to reflect on the way that your team is operating so that you can identify areas for improvement or maybe things we want to do differently. We had a great experience with a stakeholder team at a state level where everybody's so busy and they needed to check their email, but they didn't want people to check their email in the meeting. So they made a standard that at the top of every hour, the last 5 minutes was a break time and everybody could check their email or get on their phone for those 5 minutes so that they had a 3-hour stakeholder meeting, but everybody felt like a sense of relief that they could still check in on their requirements of what they had to do. And it was okay for them to check email and technology, but they wanted everyone to engage. So they came to consensus and said, how can we meet these needs? How can I still engage with the team, but also be able to meet my work demand? So that's an example of the importance of not just developing team operating standards with your core team, but constantly reflecting on them and thinking about ways you can refine and improve the way that you're operating as a team at that transformational level. And then also another piece of the United protocol that you saw was about targeting roles. So one of the important things for you to consider as you develop your core stakeholder team is the roles that you will have during meetings. So we recommend at least these 4 roles, but there are other roles that you could consider depending on the context of your work. We at least recommend having a facilitator for each meeting who facilitates the meeting and the activity, who also prepares the agenda. Also, we recommend a coach who's that person who helps keep the team on track towards high performance. And this is also the person that at the end of the meeting could be the one who helps you remember to reflect on how your team is operating and help you to do that performance monitoring idea. Also, you're going to want to have a timekeeper who monitors meeting time and helps the teams adhere to the meeting agenda. And then also consider having a recorder to document the notes during team meetings. And like we said, these are just roles to get you started. If your team also may identify other roles that are needed. And the important concept about having roles is that the roles should rotate at least on an every month basis or every other meeting that you're meeting. The idea is to really have that partnership approach and to have that equal contributions amongst the team members. We recommend rotating these roles each time you meet. So you can see in the chart here, you can have the list of the months that you're going to be meeting with your core team, with your stakeholder core team. And then you can list out the different roles and then set up ahead of time how you're going to rotate the roles so that people are prepared to facilitate an upcoming meeting, and they're prepared to know what roles they're going to have for the next meeting. So we would encourage you to think about doing this in order to really promote that concept of that partnership approach and that we're all equal. And then finally, the D in United stands for determine logistics for working together. So this is something, just questions for you to think about and to plan with your core team. When and where will meetings take place? Are they going to be virtual? Are we going to meet on Zoom? Will it be Teams? What are most people comfortable with? Will we make sure that there's a phone number dial-in line for people that have to be out, in the car picking up kids at the time of our meeting, or that they don't have internet access and they need to call in on their cell phone? How long do we need to schedule for each meeting? Who's going to send out the invitations? What shared document space will we use? So how will we organize our documents? How will you address team absences on the day of the meeting? This is a key one to decide in the very, very beginning of working together. Because when you're working with a group of diverse stakeholders, and especially in this virtual environment now, not everyone can make every meeting, and that's okay. That's completely understandable. But how can you get them up to speed on what they missed during the meeting so that they're prepared for the next meeting, and you're not spending the first 15 minutes going over what happened at the last meeting? So could you record your meeting for that day and send them a link of the recording for them to review? Could you ask them to review your meeting notes and touch base with the facilitator of the meeting to catch them up to speed? So consider those types of things to help with that, which we know is a challenge. And then what data and information are necessary to gather prior to the team meeting? Consider that. And then also talk with your team about what other logistics do we need to consider. So these are each of the steps of the United Protocol, some of those most pertinent things that we felt that could help you get prepared to work with your core stakeholder team. And I'm going to turn it over to Andrea to talk about that principle of technology optimization.
Thank you, Jen. So at this point, we have discussed so many different ideas and thoughts, but if we pull it all together, you now are aware of the new OSEP stakeholder requirements and can find them in the Universal Technical Assistance document and think through them and read through them to really understand what it means and to develop the best approach possible for you to bring together a core team to engage at that transformational level. You also now know there are multiple levels of engagement, and that to start transformationally will allow you to thoughtfully and intentionally plan about bringing people in at different levels to promote more engagement across more of your stakeholders. You also are aware now of the United Protocol, which is a series of steps that show what research tells us we should do in order to bring that team together. So once you've identified who you want on that core team, this is how you can work together to reach that transformational way of engaging. And so now that in our hypothetical situation, you have configured this core team, let's think through and imagine what it might feel like to use some of the principles that we've just learned about in the United Protocol, some of those ways of operating, to actually work to intentionally plan a stakeholder engagement plan that is really linking technology tools to the way that you're going to seek to engage a broader range of stakeholders. So as a reminder, that core team that you assemble, you want to think very differently about who you're inviting to that team to make sure that the data that you see, you have representativeness, that perspective to help you understand what the story, the data is telling you truly means. And so you have configured this core team. And one of the first things you're going to do when you come together as a core team is you're going to develop a stakeholder engagement action plan so that you can really simplify the complex process of engaging more people. And so what should a stakeholder engagement plan have? Well, here are 5 recommendations that you could consider to have in your plan. You definitely want to look at the depth or the level of interaction that Michelle walked us through with the leading by convening levels. You want to think through all of the stakeholders, how they're going to work together. You want to identify specific actions. What do you need to do and who's going to do what? How frequently do you need to engage certain stakeholders and at which level? And then lastly, understanding among your core team members, who is responsible for which piece of that stakeholder engagement plan. Because as we said earlier, Michelle talked about the fact that we are now being challenged to not have just 1 or 2 meetings, but to build this continuous way of engaging that will allow everybody to stay informed on a continuous process so that they're understanding what is happening as plans are not just developed, but implemented. And so starting at that transforming level with your core team, one of the first things you want to think through is, if our responsibility as a core team is to engage in that deep cross-stakeholder engagement and lead this team and share these leadership responsibilities, reaching for consensus, making these decisions, you can think about some of the things that Jen talked about, and you can walk through and make decisions on who needs to be involved, on what habits you want to engage in, and what virtual tools you need to use. So for example, this chart is just one layer of a complete stakeholder engagement plan that you're going to see the final of when we get through each level. And so when I talk about habits, we could select any virtual tool that exists, and there are so many out there, but it really doesn't matter what tool you're using if you don't have habits around the use of the tool. I laugh a lot because you'll find that we all have different preferences on communication, and some of us may love email and other of us may love text messages, and people might say, well, I sent you that in email, but you didn't receive the communication because you're bombarded and your email inboxes are full and you're not consistently checking them, and you're a person that prefers text. So as a core team, you want to talk through the habits and how you want to communicate. Are you a group of people that feels and comes to consensus on the fact that email is going to be where you receive that important communication about how you're going to operate, the next steps, the meetings, the in-between actions you need to take as a core team? Or are you going to be a group, a team that uses a text message chain? And that's fine. You might be a core team that has access to Slack. Slack is an instant messaging program that many organizations have. You can have phone apps. There are so many different ways to communicate. But the important thing as a core team is to discuss how and what, and then come to consensus on those things. So the core team has the responsibility to communicate within the core team to keep the team operating, but also across all the stakeholders. And so another virtual tool to think about is a shared document tool. Obviously, with multiple stakeholders engaging in work, you are going to want to have a place to share those documents, that you can work on documents at the same time in different locations. And so Google, Teams, there are so many, Office 365, so many different ways that you can share documents. As a team, you just want to come to consensus on which way works best for you. And remember, if your team is including people that might not have immediate access, you're going to have to think about how you can easily invite guests to certain tools. And most of the tools out there allow you to do that. So it's really understanding who has access to what and deciding how you want to work together. And then in order for you as a core team to engage in really meaningful meetings, you want to use fun and interactive tools like Padlet, Slido that we use today, that we've done twice, Poll Everywhere, and Zoom. And there are so many different ways to engage that if you take a couple of minutes to look through it together as a team, you might decide, hey, every time we do polls, we want to use Slido. And the cool thing about that is you can actually activate your Slido ahead of time. You can send it out to your team a week ahead of time if you want, to give people time to think through, process, and answer. And then you can review that data together at a meeting on Zoom. And it's really, really good and exciting, and also just calming to know that you don't have to do this immediately. You can give yourself a week. You can take time and set it up in a way that makes sense. And so again, when you're in that core team, it's about the habit, the tool, and deciding together what you're going to do so that you're all doing it the same way. And as Jen said earlier, progress monitoring whether or not what you've decided is actually working and being implemented. And it's okay if it's not, as long as you come back to the table to identify a different way of operating that keeps the momentum moving. At the collaborating level, you're looking at the key participants and advisors and how you can have ongoing, effective, and consistent communication across all of your stakeholders. And so the idea is very similar. That core team would set up shared drives or a schedule of meetings that would allow key participants and advisors to have access to certain information on an ongoing basis. But again, it gets back to how frequent is that? How often do we want our key participants and advisors to check in? And what are they checking in on? So these are decisions that you would have to make together as a core team. The virtual tools are very similar between the core team at the transformation level and collaborating level. And so it's not about having a fancy tool, it's about having the one that works for you. And when we look at networking and informing, the idea of networking is, back to what Michelle said, having that communication loop. That's a part that's often missed, and it involves all of your extended participants that you have connected with through your key participants and advisors. And so some of the habits that you want to think about and start to put in place are that you're strategically planning how you are going to network with that extended community. You want to base your networking efforts on preferred communication platforms. And back to the idea of your email inbox is bombarded. Email might not be the best way to reach all of your people. Maybe a certain group of stakeholders really effectively communicates through email, but maybe another set of stakeholders who you might not have had the ability to engage with previously, maybe they engage more effectively on social media. You're not going to know this unless you have representation from the various groups to help you understand what the best method of communication is per stakeholder group. And so it's about understanding what people need in order to receive your message. Because a lot of times we stop and say, well, I sent that email, or we put the flyer out on our website. Well, if a portion of your stakeholder group is not checking your website, it doesn't matter. You've got to find the way that meets them where they are. So think about it that way. Some of the virtual tools that you can use for networking are Twitter, Facebook, Poll Everywhere, surveys through Slido, focus groups. Sometimes we need to go back to the good old-fashioned focus group, which could happen virtually and or face-to-face, or we might need to be prepared to pivot back and forth between those two. I was at a meeting last night where there were 7 of us that were face-to-face, and we were comfortable being face-to-face, and we were socially distanced, but there were a handful of people that said we're not ready yet, and they were on the Zoom computer that was set up so they could see everybody in the room. And we have to think like that now. It's also the same with informing. And so sharing and disseminating information with others who care about the issue. It's all about understanding where they're going to get the information and keeping that open environment and welcoming community so that they can receive the information, but that they can also communicate back to you if needed. So kind of thinking through that networking and informing, and almost there's that like balance between the two. Just remember that both have to be strategically planned. Informing should absolutely be connected to your networking strategy, and it needs to be relevant. And so again, we often, and this is human nature, we will refer back to what is most natural for us. I mean, we all do it. And so with that expanded core team, you will be able to better understand what other stakeholders need in order to get that information out in a way that is relevant to everybody. So blogs, newsletters, flyers, podcasts, there are some radio stations that have an awesome following for some of our stakeholders. Getting ads out on the radio, there are just so many different ways. And so your core team can brainstorm and think through all of this. So we just unpacked some of the ideas around how to engage stakeholders through those multiple levels of engagement. And this is an example, a draft example only, hypothetical example of what a stakeholder engagement action plan could look like. And so I'm going to, again, go back to the hypothetical world that I'm sitting with my core team, and maybe 1 or 2 of us came up with this draft, and we're projecting this draft on the screen. Well, we can use the consensus building strategies that Jen just showed us to go line by line and say, does this work for us? When you look at this example for transforming, the stakeholders for this level of interaction are transforming, and it's obviously the core team that's seated around the table or on the Zoom call. And what we're saying is, as the core team, we're committing to following team standards, we're committing to principles, and we're committing to really making decisions around using a consensus process. We're going to commit to the partnership way. We're going to develop and implement this stakeholder plan. Now remember, it's develop this stakeholder engagement plan, but implement is the important word. So that means we're going to meet monthly, and it's going to be via Zoom. And everyone on this core team is responsible for the monthly meeting taking place. Go down to the next row and you'll see collaborating. That means we want to engage our key participants and advisors. And so as a core team, how are we going to do this? In this draft document, we have engaging via Zoom meetings for data analysis and target setting. And so we can come to consensus to say, is this the most effective way, or do we need to add additional information here into this draft plan? And so we do this by examining the actions, the frequency, and who's responsible. You might find that you want to change the frequency of time that you meet with certain groups. And like Michelle said earlier, that is okay. It's all iterative, and it all depends on how you're engaging and what you want to accomplish at the time, which is why it's so important to have a plan from the get-go and to use those processes to determine when things are and are not working and may or may not need to be adjusted. So here, obviously in the draft, you see the names of different roles of people like state team lead, parent organizational member, a local infants and toddlers director, some teachers, but you want to put real names there under the person responsible. So again, this is just an example of what a stakeholder engagement action plan could look like. There are plenty of examples and models that are free and available. You could use this as a template, you can make your own, but the important thing to do is to come to consensus on the actions that you want to take, determine the frequency, the technology, and the people responsible so that you can implement this plan consistently. And finally, as we come to the end of our 9th webinar, webinar is very exciting because it is the culmination of a series of 9 webinars that have been designed to support and promote virtual engagement. And you will find Daisy's virtual engagement toolbox on the Daisy website. It is right there. This is the image that you will see if you scroll a little bit down the screen, and you will have access to all of the resources that we as a team have provided throughout these 9 webinars. And so they're very easy to reach. You can click onto the links, the tips, you can click onto the old videos of each webinar that have been recorded. We have links to Zoom, to self-help videos. And so it's a very robust place to go if you need support for engaging your stakeholders virtually. And so to wrap it up, before we move to Q&A, we would like to hear if you are thinking of engaging your stakeholders any differently now that you have experienced this webinar. Take out your phones or use that slido.com URL and tell us, how will you prepare stakeholders to engage in data conversations now that you have some new information? Awesome. Providing more context for the data and associated requests. Better at encouraging questions at the beginning and throughout conversations. Wonderful. Going back to the My Daisy engagement toolbox, looking at representativeness of stakeholders. Listen to everyone, listen to all of them. Awesome. Well, the good thing is I'm keeping this open for at least another 24 hours. So as you are thinking about this, if you have any additional ideas or thoughts, please feel free to add to this Slido. The other really great thing about Slido is that you can save your data. You can actually make this word cloud a document. You can email the word cloud to your team to remind them of how they felt or words that captured what they were thinking or feeling. And so there's so many different ways to engage. And we just thank you all so, so much for your time. We're going to move into a Q&A session. I know we have about 5 minutes left, but I love all of the ideas that are coming up on this Slido. And really just, it's so exciting to think about all of the new work that will be happening as we move forward into this year. So let's open it up for Q&A, and I will check the chat box.
And while we're waiting for questions to come through, I just want to mention that I did put the link to the Daisy Center website, as well as the link to the virtual engagement toolbox. If you're interested in learning more about any of the tools that we've shared with you today, like Padlet and Slido, those are in some of the content that we've shared in the toolbox.
I do see 2 questions that have come through the chat from Jerry. How do you define public versus stakeholders for informing? And then also a question about how do we get access to this PowerPoint?
The PowerPoint will be posted to the website along with the recording after this webinar. So yes, you will receive a copy of this PowerPoint. Okay, Michelle, do you want to take the question about?
I can. I'm just trying to figure out the question first. So public, are you referring to at the informing level in terms of, I'm not sure what you're referring to. So I guess what I would, go ahead, Andrea, you were gonna.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see a bunch of questions rolling in. So I'm thinking about some of the virtual recommendations that I just made in the informing, like the radio station or things like that.
Right.
Like,
Got
so
it.
that would be disseminated to everybody. So in that case, how would you differentiate from public to stakeholder, I think is the question.
So I think that there's a level of informing the public that's also a part of this entire piece that is also about stakeholders. So I think that the more you have materials that meet various audiences, you can use that in your engagement work. So I think that that's an important piece. I think you can tailor specific things for different stakeholders, but if you're creating some public materials, you're just getting an awareness out there. So there's the different pieces. First, you need awareness before you can kind of go into inviting people to be a part of it. So I don't know if there's anything specific about this. So I would say, I do want to answer Kathy's question, who's in there about, are there concerns about engaging stakeholders or are not comfortable with technology, and how would you address this? For example, the piece, it really, to me, comes down to some of your partnerships. And so some of the things that I've worked with some states about, or we've had in some conversations, is that I'll use the refugee example. Actually, one of the reasons we're engaging 2 community organizations is because they are more comfortable going into, and the families are more comfortable working with a refugee organization. But the refugee organization is bringing back that information from families through their work. So the refugee organization may be the ones who are engaging the stakeholders and bringing that information back virtually. I think this is where the virtual environment, I'll only speak for myself and my organization. I think that it has, during the pandemic, it's been incredibly difficult to engage with some families who are either not as comfortable with technology, or who doesn't have the technology in which to work from. And this includes not just families, but other stakeholders as well. And so we've had to get really creative about how we do that, and how we, and especially as we're coming out of the pandemic, how do we keep the virtual piece going, but developing those relationships again that are in person. So there's not one way to address it. And I think that there also needs to be, and this I think was one of the first webinars, is there's a whole orientation to the virtual world that needs to happen. So they may have the technology, but they don't know how to use the technology. So as part of your process, whether it's a focus group or whether it's at the core team level, is engaging, like making sure people understand how to use the technology. I've worked with many schools and programs over the course of the last year and a half who have had to spend a lot of time with families actually just teaching the technology before they could even get to working with the kiddo or the family. So that's just a whole discussion that you'll need to work through, and there won't be one answer to it.
Thank you, Michelle. I also see a question from Val. Are you aware of any states that are collaborating to create a stakeholder engagement plan for all early childhood indicators under both Part C and Part B, who are with different state agencies?
I am not aware of any at this point in time. Is anyone on the call aware? They could put it into the chat.
It's a great idea. We love the idea for you to think about that way. But yes, if you are aware, type in the chat. But we do think that's a great idea, Val. All right. I'm sure I don't see any other links. We do have the United Protocol. I did see that question. That will be included as part of the PowerPoint slides. And so that will be posted as well. In addition, if you're looking at using those steps in the United Protocol. So thanks for that question, Ryan. And I know that we're at the hour, we're at the end of our webinar today. So we just wanted to say thank you so much. And any questions that come in, we'll be sure to take and get back to you and post them to the webinar website also. So we appreciate your time today. We are so happy that you were able to engage with us in our Building Effective Stakeholder Teams webinar, and we hope that we gave you some things to think about and some strategies and tips and plans that you can use to walk away and work with your stakeholders. So have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the next DAISY webinar.